here's a wallet. I'm going to send you this. It has a value. Give me the goods. That can be accomplished in communities everywhere in less than a day.
Some large percentage of Americans are really struggling,
Yes,
right? Like, I mean, not like barely getting by, barely able to
correct.
afford their groceries.
The strategic reserve is stupid,
Okay. And
and
what else?
Trump is going to be the last president.
My thing is, if they're not using Bitcoin, the government isn't using Bitcoin to purchase fighter jets, the forever wars will continue.
Who lights the match? What burns first? A fire is coming. You know what I mean? So, like, do you have a fire extinguisher? Do you know how to use it?
Hey there, Michael here with the Bitcoin Way podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Today on the show, I have Michelle Weekley, who a few weeks ago tweeted out that several friends who she trusts and believes to be very intelligent had predicted that Donald Trump would be the last president of the United States. And so obviously it was a very controversial take. She had a lot of comments and support, many meme tweets in response. And I wanted to have her on to discuss what her thoughts were, to understand where this was all coming from. We talk about Trump, everything going on. This was even before the tariffs that she tweeted this. And so we talked a bit about that and everything that he's potentially trying to do to save the dollar. I think you're going to find this very, very interesting. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, everyone. Like I said in the intro, I've got Michelle here. Michelle, welcome back to the Bitcoin Way podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be
I,
back.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. So I reached out to you because of a tweet that you shared. You said, several people I know, all generally smarter than me, believe Trump will be the last president of the United States. So I want to hear your thoughts on the opinions of friends, family, whoever's in your ear on this. But could you maybe give the backstory? Like, are the people who are saying these things from different walks of life, different, like, were these all disparate conversations you were having? How did this come about?
Yeah, absolutely. That one really took a turn that I didn't expect. Sometimes I just throw my thoughts out there and, a lot of them get ignored, but that one took some heat. Um, so my brain works in weird ways. I just like grab information from everywhere and I'm sort of constantly calculating and clocking like how much I give different sources of information different weight. And, it's just I feel like that crazy man in the GIF on Twitter. It's just my brain. So I have a really good friend who no longer he's an American citizen, but he no longer lives in the United States. Um, and I can't like I don't want to say too much without because I would totally dox who he was. But he helped build the internet. Like this guy is a very serious person. Um, and he was the first person that I heard this from. So I've been having conversations with him for, quite frankly, like a couple of years where he's really been pushing me to make sure that I have a second citizenship. And after the election, that sort of accelerated his like the intensity with which he felt like I needed to make sure I had a second citizenship. And it kind of made me question, like, okay, this is interesting because he doesn't normally have like strong opinions about anything. So that kind of changed the calculus in my brain. Um, and then in a short period of a couple of weeks, there were two different people from completely different segments of my life. So one not knowing the other, who brought up similar theses that one of them thinks, that the US is destined for just complete economic ruin and then that's kind of how the country as we know it will come to an end. I don't think his opinion is like or his thesis is quite as far as the first one where the United States will literally cease to exist. But there was a third person in it completely again unrelated like these three people don't know each other. And I mean, I think people kind of I get asked a lot, like, "What do you think about this? What do you think about that?" And I don't know why, but people kind of, like, look to what I'm thinking, and in that same vein, like, I look to different people and I weigh their opinions differently, but in all 3 cases here, the this thesis is coming from someone who I really, really value, and historically, each of these people has been very accurate in their predictions and their, thoughts on kind of what was going to play out and what was going to happen. And so that was super alarming to me. Like, as I said, I've been hearing it from one particular person for several years, and it escalated with the election. But to then have it come from several different sources, different in my life, different geographically, totally just absolutely different segments of the world. Um, it made me look much closer and say, I need to spend more time looking at this and also be prepared for this potential, which is kind of the reason that I'm always clocking some of these predictions. People are like, oh my gosh, you should chill. And I'm totally chill. I just want to be prepared. I mean, it sounds crazy, but it sounded crazy that they were gonna lock us down in our homes. I wasn't on Twitter at the time, and I really wish that I was so that I could reference my own predictions. But I was saying very early on, before most people in the United States even knew that there was a pandemic in China, I was saying, "This is really serious, and it's gonna come here. Like, there is something very big to this." And lo and behold, it did, but people have this immediate reaction that that could never happen here and you are really crazy. And I calculate that in as well because the stronger people react to something, oftentimes I find, the more of an indicator that that is. And so it was interesting to me, like if everyone had just ignored that random thought that I had posted, it would have maybe, like, changed the calculus slightly, but the fact that everyone is just like, "Oh, there's no way that could happen here," the more people who are saying there's no way that would ever happen, to me generally indicates that it's very likely that that may happen.
Yeah, I wrote down a few, of the comments, "Then you were truly stupid, like, amazingly stupid." Someone tagged the account, "I find retards."
Oh, yeah.
Someone said, "Such ridiculous hysteria." Now knowing you, I can only imagine the sleep you've lost over these mean tweets. But I'm curious to hear your so have you taken this information and established your own base case for potential timeline? And I'm not asking to make like a hard and fast prediction, but like, yes, I think in the next 4 years, we do see economic calamity. We see secession from states or like, what, how do you envision this could play out over approximately maybe what time frame? Is this really 4 years or do you think over 20 years?
Sure. I think if we're working on this timeline, it's within a year or 2. There's a lot of stuff that's happening that's not really getting any attention. Um, the state of California is doing a lot of stuff that sets them up to be the first to balkanize. Um, Trump is going hard and in terms of the tariffs, and I think there's something coming down the pipeline with the IRS, and I think we're already seeing a lot of people within the populace like snapping with the vandalism of Tesla and things like that. And I don't see Trump slowing down. I think he's going to keep pushing and that at some point something bigger breaks. It's not just Tesla's being keyed, but um, you know, an actual I think there's a potential for a true constitutional crisis, states that are seceding. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but I think it's very likely that something at that level happens. Those are the predictions that are being made, and the closer that I'm looking at it, the more strongly I agree with that. Um, I think a lot of the moves that Trump is making are attempts to save the dollar, and quite frankly, I don't think it's gonna work. It's possible that there is a slowing down of the demise of the dollar, but ultimately that will only be if they print a shit ton of money, which they really don't have any other option. Um, so I think, I mean, empires generally last 200 to 250 years. And 2026 would be, if we go back to 1776, next year will be the 250th year of the United States. Um, So I think that's as good of a prediction as any. It may accelerate this summer if we see a lot of rioting and a lot of pushback if Trump continues to keep his foot on the gas in terms of the things that he's doing economically. So, none of it's certainly not an exact science. And I think I think it's pretty eminent, to be honest. I think if something at this scale is going to happen, it's going to happen sooner than later. We have midterms that will happen next year. And I think Trump is trying to get a lot done between now and then. And so to me, that's sort of like the reasoning for that timeline. Um,
So you think he's trying to compress some of the mayhem into 18 months so that way by midterms, maybe we're steady again, people have forgotten some of that, and, from a political perspective, he's trying to, whatever you think, and I'd love for it to hear your thoughts, whatever you think he's trying to accomplish, um, maybe more specifically than just saving the dollar, which I suspect you're probably right. He's got to get this done quickly.
yeah,
The question though, I guess, is does it work or at least work well enough that we don't have economic calamity,
right.
or does it just break everything? Is he a bull in a
Yeah,
china shop, and then we have, in 6 months or 12 months we have just total meltdown.
right. And I guess that's sort of my prediction. I think I mean, prior to that post and the research that I've done after because of the level of pushback, I would have given it, like, maybe a 50-50. Like, I know some people predicting this, and it's anything is possible after COVID. I vowed to never say, like, "Oh, that would never happen here." A lot of Bitcoiners have been predicting the hyperinflation of the dollar for years and years and years, myself included. Um but I don't know that I ever saw that coupled with a complete collapse of the country or political, I guess it goes hand in hand with political upheaval, but yes, to your statement that he's trying to get as much as he can done prior to midterms, I agree with that completely, and I think he is, like, no holds bar, and he's not gonna stop. So I don't know where that takes us or to what extent it will get pushed, but I believe that that is his agenda. And I think, a lot of people are disappointed that there weren't like arrests made on day one and that there's like certain things that haven't happened. But I lived in DC for 12 years. I can tell you how slowly bureaucracy moves, even with the best intentions and good people in place. There's stuff that takes time, especially really like groundbreaking stuff. And so I think if you couple all of this fiscal uncertainty with the moves that I believe are being made behind the scenes, where we do see people start going to jail and we see very serious ramifications for a lot of the corruption and absolute theft that's being uncovered. I think if you couple those, um, that would be the catalyst for some sort of total reckoning, whether it is states that start to secede or complete balkanization or a constitutional crisis, something like that.
Yeah, I sense that we've seen like a cultural deterioration. I think you'd agree. We've seen a cultural deterioration for quite some time, and I
Yes.
think many of us in Bitcoin would attribute that to, fiat money in many ways if you back into sort of the root cause. What seems to be happening, and again, like I woke up today and, hopped on Twitter, and I'm not a finance guy, so I'm kind of trying to piece everything together, but like bond yields are spiking, and it kind of looks like whatever's going on could be a massive loss in faith of the dollar. And I think it's been a trend, but I think it was maybe the biggest spike in yields in 20 over a 24-hour period since like 1982 or something. Like it's been a long time since we've seen that kind of action in the credit markets, and I'm beginning to wonder if maybe the cultural deterioration will suddenly become a very secondary issue because eventually, the music stops and on the economy. I guess I'm curious. So, do you think that those two things kind of play hand in hand? Like the cultural deterioration is sort of a piece of this, or is it going to be some just you know event in the economy, like a bond auction that just utterly fails in China. Because part of what we have to keep in mind, I know I'm kind of rambling here, but part we have to keep in mind is that even though maybe we have economic power to wield against China or against the European Union, in aggregate, if they all say, enough, they can fight back economically, and it would be crazy to see China and the European Union unite against the United States economically. But is that the kind of thing that you anticipate might be on the horizon? And it or do you think Trump stops tariffs, if that's really the root cause of like the frustration and the loss in confidence? Like I'm just trying to piece together like what are the mechanisms by which some of what you're talking about happens? Do you have like a thesis on that?
Yeah, so I believe that the cultural divide is actually very, very serious, and I disagree that the economic uncertainty or the potential economic collapse create would sort of, um, make I think what you're saying is that, like, if economics get so bad that we could kind of all come together, forget the cultural divide, and agree that we need to save the economy. But I disagree with that. I think the collapse of the economy I think that the cultural divide has been by design over the past 10-ish years, 10, longer than that, but really it really started in 2013, 14. I think that that has all been by design, and that when everything collapses, it's going to like we're living in different realities right now. If you look at the left and the right, I mean, have never been more separate or more strongly everyone is dug into their beliefs. I think that we have gone beyond the point of cooperation or being able to come back together and agree. And it would be nice if the complete collapse of the economy kinda did away with our differences, but I think we've gone far, far beyond that, and I don't believe that that will happen. I believe that the economic collapse will actually be like the match that lights the flame, and the divide is already so deep that you end up with 2 very different fires, um, and that the economic collapse basically accelerates the cultural divide to an end game. And I think the cultural divide that has been developed or designed over the past 10 years has been on purpose, obviously, um, and that perhaps there's been a miscalculation by the globalist agenda in terms of the willingness of the populace and populist parties to fight back, and nowhere is that more empowered than in the United States.
Mm,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess, what's striking is that we have liberals keen electric vehicles.
Right.
And, to imagine a scenario where we have, some sort of an economic collapse, and then Trump's in office and, he proposes a solution, or to whatever extent he could, to imagine people who are liberals who 10 years ago were blaming me for climate change because I didn't drive a Tesla are now
Right.
keen Teslas, and also we can't agree on what a woman is.
Yeah.
Y To imagine them uniting behind Trump because of this, some sort of an event would seem, yeah, I don't see
It's
that
not gonna
scenario.
happen.
Yeah, I don't see that scenario. I'm
Right.
surprised you mentioned you saw, like, California being one of the early ones potentially teed up for secession. I would like, I you always hear Texas. I'm curious, is it because you think right now there's been a big because of like the Trump's sweeping election victory, maybe we've had like a little bit of a migration toward like social sanity, that maybe Texas kind of holds strong to some of the values of the United States, and California is kind of out there in la la land doing their own thing. Like, is that why you think California in particular would be ripe for secession, and not a state like Texas, who has historically been, talked about secession more often?
Sure. So I think there's certainly a case for, as you described, Texas and probably teaming up with states like Florida um, to go in one direction. But the reason I single out California is that last week, Gavin Newsom instructed the state of California to negotiate its own trade agreements, which got almost no attention. Um, and so I believe, California has always been a leader in terms of their willingness to push the envelope, like, with the gender stuff. They have taken it further than anyone else. With, a lot of the different things that are factors in the culture war, California has gone the furthest. We see, the state of Colorado as a close second now, but California really backs up their they push the culture and then they back it up with policy. So they have always been willing to pass new laws and create all this nonsense regulation that supports the very far left radical agenda. And so, you know, to consider that this massive state is trying is or even is considering, let alone actually trying to negotiate their own trade deals. I mean, what additional indicator do you need? You know what I mean? Like, and the second that something snaps where they actually do that, they actually say Trump has gone too far, we're doing our own thing, and then Colorado joins them. We're gonna start to see, I think very quickly we see a balkanization and states grouping. Texas obviously, I believe, would go in the opposite direction. Florida would join them. Um, so I think it is underestimated how quickly that could all spark and evolve or devolve, depending how you look at it. Um, but it's
Yeah,
very possible.
it's like it's a very gradually then suddenly thing because
Yes.
on one hand, like I've sympathized, like I would love secession, right? Like if it could be done peacefully and hey, let's just part ways. We don't agree on, the definition of a woman. So
Right.
like there's no point in trying to pretend like we agree on much else. Um, I think for me, what's always tripped me up is just this notion of like who is actually going like that'd be a big deal. Like for the United States to no longer be 50 states, for
Right.
someone to make that step seems like something that people talk about, kinda like the I'm moving to Canada if Trump wins, and then no one actually moves to Canada kinda thing, right? Like, no one's gonna upend their life. You're upending the life of your state if you make that determination. Things would have to get I guess in my view, things would have to get really materially bad, like, I can't afford my groceries anymore or, that
But a lot of people cannot afford their
I know,
groceries.
yeah, I know. I guess what I wonder, and maybe what's going on right now is the catalyst for this. But what I've always said is that I think we need to reach right now. 50% of Americans say. I always use 50% because I don't really know what the number is, but some large percentage of Americans are really struggling.
Yes.
Right, like I mean, not like barely getting by, barely able to
Correct.
afford their groceries, and when enough of them wake up to realize, "Oh, my neighbor also can't afford their groceries,
Right.
and, like, this isn't just me. Let's
Mm,
unite around this and take to the streets." Like,
right.
that's to me, like, maybe what I've always viewed as the catalyst, like, enough people suffering enough publicly to where, like, a movement, a revolution of some kind can
Yeah.
begin. And I wonder if maybe some of what's happening on one hand, I wonder if some of what's happening in the economy right now could be sort of the spark. But at the same time, most of the people who are impacted, going to the grocery store, they can't afford it, also aren't the ones who own equities. And so like the dip in the stock market is affecting Wall Street a lot more than the average Main Street, family. Um,
Absolutely.
so I don't know. I'm just I guess I'm trying to piece together like what comes first is like desperation from the bottom 50% call it, or like some truly cataclysmic event like we're
Right.
talking about. And I'm having a hard time kind of figuring out what I think it is, and I think which which direction it goes could impact what the end result is. Do we have just yeah
I don't
yeah
disagree with you, but also I think to some extent it's a little like which came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, does it really matter? I think what's
yeah
important is for people to be prepared for it to happen because I truly believe one, I don't know which may be first. I don't know. But I think one or the other is going to happen and in quick succession. Um, and then are you prepared, right? Because it doesn't necessarily matter who lights the match or why it was lit. If everything is burning, what matters is Do you have a place to go? Do you have a fire extinguisher? Do you have food? Do you have a way to sustain yourself? Do you have a local community that you can rely on and participate in? Those are the things that is going to matter. And, a lot of people call me stupid and say, like, wow, you must be so miserable. Um, but I actually I'm super happy and self sufficient. And the reason that I gameplay all this stuff out is because I want to be prepared. And so I'm very involved in my local community. Um, I own land. I'm very self-sufficient. I'm very close. Like my family and I are going to be okay if this all happens. And to me, like that's what matters. It doesn't really matter who lights the match, what burns first. A fire is coming. You know what I mean? So like, do you have a fire extinguisher? Do you know how to use it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, so you're suggesting I should stop kicking the can and buy some chickens and start
Yes.
start harvesting my own eggs and okay.
Yeah.
Um,
And I have chickens, like, maybe I should start tweeting about that, I actually don't talk very much about my personal life, and that's been by design, but, like, I don't know, maybe I should stop predicting things and getting called stupid, and I should just start, like, talking about homesteading because I think that that is really like, Bitcoin matters a lot, and Bitcoin, I think, is gonna save those of us that are smart enough to be in Bitcoin, but you have to feed yourself too, and chickens are a great way to do that.
yeah. So let's talk about the implications of all of this and in Bitcoin because so there's a part of me obviously I'm a Bitcoiner. I'm not a gold guy. There's a part of me though that I'll sort of play devil's advocate on the hardcore Bitcoin maxi position. Um, we talk all the time about, call it 1% of the world really understands Bitcoin.
Mhm.
Let's say. Um, if this happens in the next 12 to 18 months, to me, it would seem probable that the flight to safety for most people would be gold or silver, precious metals. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what's the catalyst for people adopting Bitcoin, you know, as a means of protecting themselves against economic uncertainty or collapse, versus, sort of tried and true things that have lasted thousands of years that Wall Street already understands that, financial advisors might even be allocating, part of the client portfolio to versus Bitcoin is still a speculative asset in many minds. What are your thoughts on that? Am I just off?
Sure.
Am I underestimating people's ability to adapt?
Well, I think people generally don't adapt until they need to, right? So from
Mhm.
a retail perspective, um, a lot of people will not adopt Bitcoin until they have to. And so what does that look like? Like, why would they have to? Um, we saw, in many other places where fiat currency has collapsed, Lebanon, Nigeria, a lot of places in, Central and South America, we see a flight to more harder currencies. And in many cases, that of course is a sliding scale. So in many cases that looked like the dollar, but now we have this option of Bitcoin. Certainly gold has been an option, but gold is difficult, right? So if you have some sort of emergency situation and you have to flee to something, it's not easy to flee to gold. Like, where do you get it? How do you keep it? If you need to trade with it, like how do you do that, right? Like all the things that we know Bitcoin solves that gold presents challenges in, um, those become very immediate problems if you're trying to flight into Bitcoin. Um, I actually see more of a driver, top down driven adoption, necessity of adoption. I think that Wall Street no longer sees Bitcoin as necessarily a risk asset. And as the dollar continues to be uncertain or weakened, you're going to see more and more allocation from Wall Street into Bitcoin, and that will ultimately lead retail. And then when everything collapses and the people that have assets are holding Bitcoin, um, I think you'll see a much quicker adoption at the retail level when they look around and the people who are not in ruin are holding Bitcoin. We've seen this happen where other currencies collapse and you have people at the top that are holding dollars, which historically were a stronger currency than their native fiat currency. So I think we see a mirroring of that and everything collapses. People that have Bitcoin have a stronger position. And then you have at the same time, people from on a retail perspective are sort of forced into adopting Bitcoin.
So do you think Trump and Besant and his team really, or at least, maybe in aggregate, really understand Bitcoin? Like, do you think that they, in the scenario, in a truly dire situation, do you think they would recognize Bitcoin for the strategic advantage it is over gold? Because, like, I know it seems China hoards a lot of gold and has probably been buying a lot more over the years. Do you think they would, like, the top down might be not even just Wall Street, but the US government saying the only way we survive as a nation is by adopting the better option, which is Bitcoin. And maybe that's sort of the catalyst for retail also adopting. Like, I guess what I'm thinking is if we got off this call in this worst case scenario happened while we're sitting here talking, and we get off the call and we're like, holy shit, like it's happening. Um, I think of how few people in my life, well, first of all, would have any idea even to run to gold because they've
Right,
never taken any time to study this, much less Bitcoin. And all Wall Street can peddle really are the ETFs, which isn't really owning Bitcoin. So, like,
right.
okay, maybe it saves you as long as dollars are continued to be used in transactions or whatever, because you get the number go up feature. Doesn't really help you probably transacting locally with your local farmer to buy beef, to feed your family or whatever. I don't know if there's a question in there, but maybe you have a a
Well,
comment on that.
I would say it doesn't until it does, and that
Mhm,
the sort of gradually and then suddenly scenario applies. I have a really great farmers market near me that I get a lot of my stuff at every week, and many of those merchants are learning about Bitcoin.
mhm.
And in literally on Sunday, one of them said to me, like, what did he say? I don't know what he said, but he basically said, "I know I'm gonna have to start accepting your Bitcoins soon." Right? He knows nothing about Bitcoin. He only accepts cash. Uh, but I think it is on the radar for a lot of people. And the second that we need an alternative system because our dollar is not worth anything, then we'll learn it. And ultimately, to understand deeply the way that, nobody totally understands Bitcoin, right? But you can study it endlessly and still not completely understand it. But ultimately, to understand the utility of Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, it takes 10 minutes. Here's a wallet. I'm going to send you this. It has a value. Give me the goods. That can be accomplished in communities everywhere in less than a day, in less than an hour. You know what I mean? Like,
So
and
everyone's got a Bitcoiner in their sort of sphere who they'd say, "Hey, I don't want your dollars because they're worthless now."
right,
Like, what can you pay what can you pay with? And it's like, well, I've got Bitcoin and they're not making more of it, and it's the scarce asset. You don't really have to understand much of the fundamentals, or like suddenly, like, maybe I'm arguing against my devil's advocate position, how I know, but that might be all they need to know is it's the
correct,
scarce digital money, and you can send it to me right here, right now. I can set up a
right.
wallet on my phone in 2 minutes. And like maybe it just sort of happens organically. Maybe it is
Yeah.
more grassroots.
Yeah, and I think, you may see merchants immediately accept the Bitcoin and go to fiat, which is what we're seeing right now. We're seeing a lot of that in El Salvador. But at a certain point, they're going to stop doing that because they're going to say, I'd rather hold this thing that's volatile than turn it back into this paper that's worth nothing. Right.
Mhm,
So, I think people learn very quickly when they have to learn.
mhm.
And if this plays out, then they will have to learn. And the ones that don't are not going to succeed. But the people that have things of value, if you know how to raise chickens and grow beef or have a garden, and like if you have goods, um, you're pretty self sufficient and you're pretty competent. And so I have total faith that you can learn to use Bitcoin and that you will learn to use Bitcoin very quickly
Yeah.
out of necessity.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Maybe what concerns me the most is so one of our founders, Tony, is he escaped Lebanon,
Mhm.
experienced the collapse, left with $70 in his pocket after being nearly retired in his
Right.
40s. And he said, his sort of meme is donkeys, donkeys everywhere because it's just, people following the pack. He said even in
Yes.
Lebanon, so many people haven't adopted Bitcoin. Like they're still
Right.
using the Lebanese pound, and it's like, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of Lebanese pounds to a dollar today, and they're
Yeah.
still sort of scraping by. Now that said, my sense is the concentration of Bitcoiners in the United States is much higher. So like there are more people like you going to a farmer's market who could tell 20 vendors in an hour, hey, I'll pay you in Bitcoin and here's how
Right.
you accept it. I can help you download a wallet in no time. Um, I guess yeah, I haven't even really thought. I'm thinking about like my own life, my family, my kids, what happens in the United States, because that's just the worldview.
Sure.
But like, what does this look like on a global scale, and
Yeah.
how does it begin to happen?
It's not pretty, I don't think.
Yeah.
You asked earlier, do I think that Trump really understands Bitcoin? I don't. I think, he's older. He's very dug into the dollar. He's trying to save the dollar. I
Mhm.
believe I believe that he believes he can save the dollar. And so there's a little bit of there's a blind spot there, right? Because of his own ego and just sort of blind faith in what he's doing. And I think that's necessary to get as far as he has gotten and accomplish the things that he's accomplished a lot, right? Like he's made good on on most of the promises, like a lot of the stuff that he promised, especially Bitcoiners that he would do, he's done. Um, but do I think that he succeeds in saving the dollar? Not necessarily. And do I think that they would immediately run to Bitcoin? I don't know. I don't. I think certain segments and possibly states do immediately run to Bitcoin, and that could very likely be a driver of balkanization. You have some states or regions that want to maintain a dollar standard, some that perhaps want to try a gold standard, and some that better understand Bitcoin and uh, move to a Bitcoin standard. And that could actually really be a driver of the divides that may be coming.
Yeah,
Um,
this is what's so hard about, we keep electing 80-year-olds who
right.
aren't gonna understand a 16-year-old technology that's still, very new in its adoption. Do you think so? Okay, I think I'm with you on Trump's understanding of Bitcoin. My sense is maybe he kind of understands there's something there, but he's not gonna take the time. He's trying to save
Sure.
the dollar. He's talked about trying to save the dollar and the importance of dollar strength for a long time. Do you think, though, that he might have advisors like Ludnick, Dissent, who maybe do
Even
under Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
No, no,
yes,
no.
even Vance. Vance is a Bitcoiner. Um, the vice president holds a fair amount of Bitcoin. It was in his disclosures, and I believe, based on a handful of things that he said, that he understands Bitcoin deeply. And
Mhm.
so, should it be necessary, I believe people like that will step up. Um, and so that's a factor that will play in as well. And I think Trump is I have faith that when all else fails, that Trump would listen to advisors. It may be painful, it might not be pretty, but he is surrounded by people who do deeply understand Bitcoin. And so again, a lot of people are unwilling to accept or understand Bitcoin until it's an absolute necessity, and that goes all the way to the top. I mean, that is very likely going to be the case with Trump as well. But what's really great is that he has a lot of resources and a lot of people around him that we know understand Bitcoin. And so to me, that's great.
Yeah. Do you so I've been, very skeptical, I'm skeptical of any and all politicians, almost equally. Um I don't like, I don't wanna I'm sure we'll disagree here at some point, but, like, the Bitcoin Act, Senator Lummis and
Mhm.
some of what she's pushing for, I don't really like the idea of the US government buying Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin is for anybody. Um, I support anyone's right, even my enemies, to do it. I would much prefer a grassroots movement where I teach my friends and family and you do the same, and we migrate to a Bitcoin standard out of broad adoption and not for it's not forced upon us or whatever.
Right.
I listened to a podcast though recently. I think Cynthia Lummis actually does really understand the problem. I don't think she'll say the quiet part out loud, which I also sympathize with, but that the dollar is dying and it's not going to last forever and it could even last a lot less than forever. Maybe 6 months or a year or 2, which
Right.
I honestly is not my base case. I think they can kick the can. I think the money printer turns on. I think we end up experience massive inflation, and eventually they have to sort things out, and by they, I mean, hopefully we.
Mhm.
I'm curious though what you think about some of this Washington adoption. Like when the strategic Bitcoin reserve was announced, I was at a stage of my Bitcoining that I was excited and I thought this is it, we're going to win. And now I'm like I'm so anti-state that I can't even stomach the idea of them spending my money on Bitcoin that I would like to get my hands on. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the strategic reserve, the Bitcoin Act, kind of any and all things. We can just bat this around.
Yeah. So I don't actually disagree with you. I think it's all really stupid. Um, yeah, and um, people online are not good with nuance. So I'm sure I'll get a lot of like, oh, but you've been, advocating for people to vote and simping for politicians and shit like that. And I guess it's not complicated to me. I guess people think it's a complicated perspective. Like for me, what I would prefer is that we just abolish the state entirely. I'm super pro balkanization, balkanize the states, get rid of DC. Like that's what I would like. But nobody's doing that, right? Like if you guys want to march down to DC and abolish it, I am happy to join you. Let me know when and where. But so long as that is not happening, there will be a president, and I would prefer that that president is not a communist trying to shut down my job and my company and my entire industry. So, that was why I got on board with Trump and, told people, "Please go out and vote," which still kind of pains me that I did that, but ultimately, you know, we saw during COVID, like, how much local politics affects our lives. The state you're living in matters a lot. And then, over the past couple years as I started working in the Bitcoin industry, I saw very closely the initiative to shut the entire industry down. And so I didn't think I had any other option but to advocate against that and help spread awareness about how seriously that was getting. But am I a fan of any of it? Like, is that what I set out to do? No. I mean, Bitcoin has really come a long way from separate money and state, um, which is what I always wanted and what I think Bitcoin does ultimately accomplish. So, you know, I I don't mind if it all burns to the ground because then we can rebuild it and we can do it without the federal government. Like I see no need for any of it. And so is it better? I mean, if it's a binary choice between the state adopting Bitcoin and the state shutting the entire industry down, labeling us all criminals and forcing us to either go into hiding, flee the country, I mean, it was getting to the point where you were gonna have no Bitcoin products or services in the United States. So the choice between the 2 is like, I guess I'll take state adoption, and that comes hand in hand with more, like, pro-regulation, which is really a necessity, but do I care? Like, a lot of people have asked me, "Am I gonna go back to DC?" And that's an absolute no. Like, if I'm gonna spend any time and effort educating people, it's gonna be normal people, the people at the farmer's market, like, that's who I want Bitcoin to help, and if the government adopts it along the way, and that makes it a less hostile environment for us, great. Um but am I, like, super excited? No. Quite frankly, if Trump had freed Ross and not done the Bitcoin strategic reserve, like, I was totally prepared to just kinda laugh and be like, "That's okay. Like, it's fine." Like, I'm not here for that. But I also see myself as like a realist, and it was getting really real on the opposite end of the spectrum where we were all going to be,
Yeah,
declared
yeah.
criminals.
Yeah. No, I remember on our first discussion on the podcast, you were talking about just, how insanely difficult it is in light of the regulatory environment for you to build and to do the things that you're doing. And, yeah, I have this, I have this internal battle between, like, my philosophical beliefs and, like, my practical beliefs, and
Yeah,
I think that's kinda what you're it's like philosophically, I can't justify the existence of a central government.
right.
And I definitely can't justify the existence ethically or philosophically of someone else being able to print the money that they then force us to use. But practically, where we are today, I think there's a case to be made for more constructive regulation. And what gives me pause on like the strategic reserve, because I've been railing against it for a while. And it's like, what happened to separation of money and state?
Right.
There are people who are philosophically very aligned with me, like Pierre Richard, who is, he's been pretty active engaging government and sort of making the case and why he thinks a strategic Bitcoin reserve could maybe help reduce the scale and depth of the pain to come. And I'm not quite there on like mechanically how does that make a difference. Um, what my biggest concern is with it is that somehow now if there's a collapse and they have to choose something, Bitcoin, gold, like there has to be some resolution to the chaos.
Mhm.
Um, okay, like I get that. What I'm concerned is if there's not a collapse, is that government adoption of Bitcoin, it will enable them to sort of determine the rhetoric as to what Bitcoin is. It's digital gold. It sits in a digital vault and we don't do anything with it. Like we've had a lot of gold at Fort Knox, supposedly anyway, for a long time. And that has had no impact on the forever wars, on the handouts, on the money printing, on anything that we as Bitcoiners, I think, broadly claim to want to end. And so, could we end up in a situation where I think Bitcoin will ultimately win, but it could be 100 years from now if they spin this digital gold, digital capital narrative, and like it just sits there and it goes up in price over a long period of time. But it doesn't. If they're not my thing is if they're not using Bitcoin, the government isn't using Bitcoin to purchase fighter jets. The forever wars will continue because that means they're
Yes.
using the money printer or more debt issuance. Do you think I'm onto something, or am I just crazy?
Uh,
Settle down. Bitcoin's gonna win. It doesn't really matter how the government defines Bitcoin.
no, I completely agree. I mean, I've said many times that we do need to be careful about cheering on like the strategic reserve and the adoption of Bitcoin by governments because the more involved they are, the more regulation there could be, the more danger we see, or the more possibility of something like, the 6102 where they confiscated everybody's gold. I mean, we used to talk a lot about that, and it's possible that the adoption of Bitcoin by government ultimately does lead to this short term, you know, oh, it's really important. And so we're going to hold it for you because, like, you shouldn't be holding it yourself. We saw them do that with gold. I think that's on the table if the dollar doesn't just totally collapse. I agree with your concerns, and I think um, it's sort of this catch 22 where they're either gonna get it now, which they probably won't, or they're gonna get it later after they print a whole ton of money. Um, I totally agree that there's a danger in, like, cornering Bitcoin as digital gold, but I think it needs to prove its value first before it's widely adopted as a medium of exchange, and I think that that is ultimately inevitable as we see its value go up. Um, I don't know if that I don't know if that makes any sense, but
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah, I'm just I guess what my preference would be is if we could avoid economic calamity in the short term to continue the education. At the same time,
sure.
I think we're mutually onto something here that you need to reach a point of pain
Right,
to take a look. I've got 3 really good books that I could hand out to every person in my life that would completely change their minds, send them down the rabbit hole. Their worldviews would be altered, I'm confident, and they're not gonna do it.
right.
Right? Like, they're just not gonna do it, and so, like, maybe we do just need the fallout, the economic fallout to be the catalyst to bring them into the fold, and they're never gonna read the Bitcoin. At some point,
No,
SAFE's gonna stop selling copies of the Bitcoin Standard
right.
because no one cares about why it is helpful. They just started accepting, it in exchange for their apples and pears at the farmer's market or whatever, or
Yeah,
oranges wherever you are.
right.
Um,
No, I
yeah,
I agree with that completely. I mean, even like you said in Lebanon, like not everyone is gonna be willing to do the education, and I think we're at this kind of turning point where I mean, I've found myself even like contemplating like how do I adjust what I'm trying to do because I think we're past the point of education. I hate to say that, but I think economic ruin is coming and that necessity is what's going to drive adoption. And so we need to be prepared for that with the tools and also like a new lens on education. People like ourselves who have been involved for a while are interested in understanding deeply the problems that we're trying to fix. And, we've kind of like dipped our toe in all these macroeconomic conversations. But I think the time for that, like things come and go. And I think we're kind of going on that. We're exiting that and that we're gonna have to start doing education that's really tailored around just absolute necessity. So it's not necessarily the Bitcoin standard, right? It's more, here's what you do. Um,
yeah.
here's how it
Yeah.
works.
And on one hand, that's fine. On the other hand, it's frustrating the amount of pain I think we're gonna have to see people experience to get there. Like they could have just read a book,
Right.
and we're like what we're really trying to do is get as many people on the life raft as possible because we haven't even talked about, and we don't necessarily need to. I know you've got a stop here in just a bit, but like the custodial risks.
Mhm.
I think most people they think they've got Bitcoin, and it's like, do you think if we have an economic collapse, if Trump is the last president of the United States, do you think that Coinbase is just gonna send you your Bitcoin that you think you have in an hour? Like,
No.
God only knows what the fallout from these custodians are gonna
Right.
be, and
It's gonna be deep pain.
yeah, like
Get
it.
your coins off of Coinbase,
Yes.
especially.
Especially, yes. Yeah, and I think that's the other it's sort of back to the point I was making about Bitcoin is the my fear of the Bitcoin is digital gold narrative is that really the only way it's useful in the ways we're talking about, which will become important, like to buy groceries at some point, is to have it in self-custody.
Yes.
And, I think a lot of people are gonna miss that boat, and they're gonna be scrambling to figure out the only way they're gonna be able to really get a hold of it is gonna be because you, Michelle, paid
Mhm.
them for some service that they rendered.
Yeah,
And,
peer to peer.
yeah, it really is gonna have to be a peer-to-peer revolution.
Right.
Um,
I
is there
think that will
Okay, yeah,
happen, just not in the way
yeah,
that people think, right? Like,
yeah.
it's gonna happen out of necessity.
Yeah. Ironically, you're making me optimistic because I think you're reorienting my thought on how this could happen, and that is if people like yourself and me and so many people that I've been fortunate to meet in the Bitcoin space, if we just begin to utilize that, the more desperate people become. Well, now suddenly, I might have 20 new people in my life who willingly accepted Bitcoin in exchange for something that would have
Correct.
never done that
Right.
if they didn't have some, material need to do so.
Exactly. I think that's absolutely the case, and I agree, it's not ideal that we're likely in my opinion, very, very likely going to see absolute total economic ruin that will drive that necessity, but
Mhm.
there is hope, right? Because we do have a solution for those that are willing to learn it and those that are providing real value. So, that's another piece of the hope to me that we see a return of hard money values and standards, right? So I will teach anyone how to use Bitcoin. And who's going to be most incentivized to learn that? It's people that are providing something of actual value. So people growing apples and oranges, people working in the trades who are doing things that are really necessary. There's going to be really hard times for this huge middle class. I don't think that there's gonna be much of a middle class. You're going to have to provide value, and that will put you in the top percent, or you're probably not gonna be doing well. Um, and that's unfortunate, but, I also I think it's inevitable at this point for the short to medium term.
Yeah, yeah. So you think the gender studies majors are gonna struggle in this new monetary paradigm?
I do, and I am not gonna feel bad for them at all. Like, get out of here with your trust the science nonsense. The literal definition of science is to question the science. And if you have a problem with that, like, go elsewhere. Go to China and try to question the science.
S Okay, so last, well, I got 2 more questions. So last, Bitcoin related or I guess Trump related really. Do you think with these tariffs, I mean, they are wreaking havoc right now, and it could get I mean, it could get a lot worse. We'll see what happens. Is your prediction that he continues to hit the gas on everything he's doing? He's not gonna swallow his pride, change course. He's gonna do what he thinks he needs to do to accomplish whatever he thinks he's accomplishing, likely saving the dollar? Or do you think there's a chance we keep getting slapped back with tariffs and, eventually he sees enough pain in stateside that he says, okay, we need to, let's negotiate, or is he
Right.
going to sit down at the table with people?
So it's kind of twofold. I think there are negotiations happening, but
Mhm.
ultimately, I think what this is not necessarily a trade war. There's kind of like on the side, there's a trade war happening, and there are like 70 countries that have come to the table to negotiate, right? But ultimately, I believe this is about China and China's dominance and Trump trying to prevent a multipolar world. So a lot of people have been talking about like the rise of BRICS and how we're probably in the future going to live in a world where we have two major, economies being the United States and China. And I think that that is ultimately what this is about. Um, and I think that he keeps pushing it. I sent you before we came online, I sent you a map of global trade.
Yeah.
And if you look at that, it's really a great visual of how much global trade, yeah, China has taken over. Um, I mean, look at that. That's undeniable. And it's my belief that Trump is trying to reverse that trend, which is an absolute necessity. Otherwise, we're trading in the UN. We're not in the yuan. We're not trading in dollars. I mean, China's on a mission to take over the world. In 2018, President Xi ratified the constitution so that he could take a third term. Um, they're on a mission, and they don't have, they don't have the constraints that Trump has or that the US has. So, if we don't push back on that, it's not gonna end well, and I believe that Trump does understand that deeply and that that's what he's trying to accomplish, and that his tolerance for pain is probably very deep because the stakes are very deep. I mean, the stakes could be, you know, who rules the world? Is it the United States or is it China? And I believe that that's the game that he's playing. I think all of the stuff about tariffs is just a sideshow.
Yeah, the challenge is reversing this. I mean, on some level, I think it has a lot less to do with what I didn't like about this end wokeness post. I think you shared. No, maybe they shared a different one you sent me. Was that they said, this is what our politicians have done, and to me, it's like, no, this is what fiat money does, and having a non-neutral global reserve currency like the dollar means we need to export dollars, and everything else is going to be cheaper around the world. Yeah, you can blame politicians for that. It's not like I was involved in that decision. But like it also doesn't happen overnight that you move manufacturing from China or anywhere else and onshore it, especially not for the most important things we need.
Right.
chips, for example, like microprocessors.
Mm,
That'd be awesome if we were producing those in the United States, but it's gonna be a hell of a lot more expensive, and that doesn't happen o over 6 months, right? Like,
right.
so
So
yeah, I think timelines, I think timeline is maybe his biggest problem. Not forget midterms. I mean,
right.
I think they're gonna get screwed in midterms because I think this is probably gonna be a very painful thing.
Yeah,
But
I agree.
but I mean, we need a decade of development in our own manufacturing, and I don't. It's the Triffin dilemma. That doesn't happen w-
Right.
as long as it's way cheaper for us to produce elsewhere. And
Yeah.
yeah, you can slap tariffs on, but like there are externalities to doing that too.
Yeah, I think like one of the sort of just additional factors that I would add in there is obviously reshoring is going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of pain. But what you can do, and is probably, if I had to guess, part of this plan, is you can weaken China without necessarily reshoring everything immediately. So, the chips can be made in Vietnam, the pharmaceuticals can be made in India. You can kind of like distribute some of the manufacturing. It doesn't necessarily have to be reshored immediately to um, hit knock down a few notches China's growing centralization. And my guess is that would be a really good sort of medium term outcome to weaken China's stronghold on the manufacturing, distribute it in the process of reshoring it. So if I'm Trump, like that's my plan. Uh, is that accomplishable? What does that look like? How much pain do we put up with? Serious questions.
We'll
Um,
see.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
It makes sense. Well, hey, I wanna let you get going. I got one more question for you. It's the one I always ask at the end. I forgot to reprime you for this, but what is an unpopular opinion that you hold? You get bonus points if you offend some Bitcoiners with it.
Ooh. Okay. So
You already said the strategic reserve.
the strategic reserve is stupid.
Okay, and
And
what
Trump
else?
is going to be the last president.
I think that's an unpopular opinion.
It
What
is
hey,
apparently I'm super stupid.
so give me the context on that book. So I know I should be familiar with it. Just remember I've only been in Bitcoin 2.5 years. So
No, it's okay.
what's
I was
the
not familiar with this until, like, 6 months ago. Um, Ingersoll Lockwood was an American. This book was written in 1900. There's actually 3 stories in this book. The first 2 are about Baron Trump, who lives in a castle in New York. Um and goes on all of these wild adventures. It's insane. And the thing that's crazy is that this Ingersoll Lockwood person was not like some crazy artsy mystic. He was a lawyer who was he worked under uh he worked who was it? Sorry, I'm blanking. But this guy was a very successful lawyer in a family full of lawyers. He was assigned by the president at one point at the time, and he just wrote these books. It was like he was like a hobby novelist. And I don't know what I believe about that. Like, is it some kind of prophecy or whatever? Like, even for me, that's a little bit far out there, but it's really, really interesting to examine. And I think it does anger a lot of people, but if you're that angry, if that's your immediate reaction, then you're not prepared. Like, you should be prepared for all possible crazy things. Like, they locked us in our houses. I mean, there's nothing they won't do. So be prepared. And my hot take is just that the strategic Bitcoin reserve is stupid.
Huh. I love it. It's a great place to wrap. Michelle, thank you so much for your time. It's great talking to you as always. We probably gonna need to do this again though at some point because I imagine 6 months from now there's gonna be a whole lot to talk about.
Yes, yes. Either you can all just read mean tweets about me because I was really way off, or we will be in the midst of some serious ruin and we will have to talk about how to save our local communities.
Absolutely. All right, Michelle. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me. It was great to talk to you again. I will talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Bye bye.
And that's a wrap. Again, I hope you enjoyed my conversation. Love Michelle. Appreciate her coming on again. Of course, if you need help with Bitcoin and proper 100% self custody, which so many of you do, go to thebitcoinway.com/podcast. Schedule a free 30-minute consultation with a member of our team. We would love to help you. We also help with online privacy, setting up privacy phones. We have a Plan B residency option that everyone should be looking at right now in this chaotic world. Again, that's thebitcoinway.com/podcast. If you're enjoying the show, do me a favor, give us a like, subscribe, share this with someone who you think might enjoy it as well. We would really appreciate that. And until next time, stay safe, stay sovereign, and remember the yield on Bitcoin is freedom.